This is the Texas Land Guys podcast, hosted by brothers Tim Dosch and Tom Dosch. With their partners David Marshall and Trip Rich, they have built DMRE, the leading land brokerage in Texas. With decades of experience brokering deals between landowners and real estate developers, they take you inside the deals that move the market.
Welcome to the Texas Land Guys podcast. Tim, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing good. Doing really good.
Good. I thought we would hit a topic today that has been all over the news. I think it's probably been dominating the news cycle now for quite some time. And it's artificial intelligence. And specifically, we're going to talk about what we're seeing day to day in real estate, because this has started to become, there were a number of people using it in 2025, but now in 2026, it's if you're not using artificial intelligence in some form or fashion and how you're evaluating deals, looking at deals, anything from the kind of unsophisticated out of the business landowner all the way to, you know, some of our most sophisticated institutional clients, we're running into it and having these conversations every single day.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think early on, it was more the younger people, you know, that were more tech savvy and, you know, really exploring these tools when they were not as valuable as they already are. And now I'm seeing, you know, everybody's using it, even people that are much older in their 50s, you know, that you wouldn't expect are exploring Claude and using it for their business or rolling it out for their whole company. They're learning all these little nuances, you know, and I was just at breakfast with a guy who's the head of a family office who you wouldn't think is deep into this, just because of his age demographic. But he was talking to me about tokens and about how to, you know, use less tokens on Claude and little tricks for that. So some pretty nuanced things that you just wouldn't expect from someone who's his age. And then there's the other guy at the table who was maybe 60 or so, who's like, man, I'm not letting that on my phone. I'm not going to do anything with AI, you know, and he's a long-term successful developer. So you still have kind of two camps. You have people that are not embracing it, but more and more people are embracing it and they're seeing the value of it. And it's an incredible tool. I think we'll probably talk this morning about there's some challenges with it. And if you don't know how to use it, if you're not as experienced in the business, it can take you the wrong direction. But if you know what you're doing and you have expertise in our business, it can be extremely valuable.
Yeah, I think that there's ways that you can use it to just do things a lot more efficiently. And then there's ways that are just going to be absolute game changers. And then there's the ways that the public is using it, people like us is using it. And then there's ways that some of these big companies are using it, and some of the breakthroughs that you're going to see just within the way that industries are completely reformed, the way that, you know, currency is moving, the way that science, it benefits from something like AI and the power of these models that we're seeing day to day. I think that there's also some challenges with it, and we're having to maneuver that just day to day, because we'll have conversations with landowners or clients that are trying to use it to make decisions. And although the models are really powerful, there's so much context that's needed and just information and data that's maybe not generally available to make some of these decisions. And so it'd be interesting to talk about that some, but maybe first talk about where we're using and seeing benefit from it and how exciting that's been, because we've really been investing and looking at more and more opportunities to use it day to day. And it's not just Claude or ChatGPT. There's so many other, just like you said, like tools that are available, both tools that are available from third parties that can be used, and also just tools that you can now develop so much easier, because the barrier to entry and getting into the space from a consumer standpoint, it's really not that technical or that complicated anymore to like code something or create an app or go and maybe, you know, develop an underwriting model. The type of business that we do, really anything within real estate, it's pretty easy for these models. And so it allows the average person within the business to have access now to just an incredible amount of value.
Well, it's amazing how user-friendly it is, because it actually teaches you how to use it. Like you're saying, if you want to try and accomplish a task or you want to, you know, build something, you just ask it, you know, is this possible? How do I do this? And it'll walk you through exactly how to do it. It's amazing. We were just in Hawaii as a family, and we were walking around buying some t-shirts and stuff like that, getting coffee in this little town where we were. And my son was making these calls. And I was like, what are you doing? And he's like, he had realized that these different little shops, like shaved ice places and t-shirt shops, didn't have websites. And so he was cold calling the owners, and then he was building them websites as we were walking around. And the tools have gotten so good that within a couple of minutes, he could get a mock-up website for this company that was really impressive and email it to him. And so he was getting business that way. And it was crazy. I mean, he's a 15-year-old kid. How it was teaching him how to build these websites, how to add things, like if they wanted to order food online or something, how he could do that. And so it just shows that really anything you want to do now, things that used to cost $20,000 to create and take months to create and take all this coding and all this very specific expertise. Now someone can do some of these things in a couple of minutes, and they can actually make a more professional product than you could have made, a couple of years ago, spending a lot of time. And so that's just one example. But I mean, it's really incredible what it can do.
Yeah. And I think even just in simple ways. So I've noticed personally that I've been able to offload just a lot of the things that were taking me a lot of time, like reviewing emails, writing emails, interacting in different ways, like communication-wise with some of these different tools. And so there's tools now where the voice models are so powerful. You can talk to text, and it's not the old talk to text where it's like, every 5 words you're having to go in and edit because it misspelled or it didn't understand. I mean, this is the technology now. It's gotten to the point where like super unique names, words, company names. You think about some of the companies we work with, their names are really unique. So when you're trying to voice to text that, it's like never going to get the spelling right. Yeah. Well, you'll go in and correct it one time, and then it'll save that down for the future. And so it knows now, like if someone spells their name uniquely, if a company's name is unique, like it'll nail that. And so most of the emails now that I'm responding to, I'm just talk to text responding to emails. It's so much faster. It's so much easier to give context. We're so busy, because we're constantly getting calls, we're in meetings, we're jumping from one thing to the next. To be able to just quickly in the moment talk to text and email, and it's actually correct and move on, or talk to text to these different like ChatGPT, Claude, these different models. It's incredibly powerful because it provides context to the models in ways that trying to sit there and type up a question or type up an answer, you're going to be too concise for the model, and you're going to leave things out. And these models really need context. And so like really simple things actually just make the day-to-day job a lot more enjoyable because I'm not as bogged down. And that's just scratching the surface. That's not really where the value is. But I think from an enjoyment level, there's a lot of value in just being able to simplify a lot of just the more like the tedious tasks of the day-to-day work of someone that is working on a computer or working, in some kind of digital communication every day.
Yeah, probably just the way I used it yesterday, that was really time saving for me. We were negotiating a contract with a public company on a site, and my client who's a seller, we drafted a contract, and this is like a 30 to 40 page commercial contract. There's a lot of complications with this deal. The public company completely rewrote the contract. I mean, the entire thing was red, green, and blue. And so it wasn't just like deal point changes and legal changes. It was literally rewriting what my client's attorney had written. And it was like 30 pages. And so trying to read through that and make sense of it before a call with my client would have been really hard. So I put it into Claude, and it read the whole thing within probably like 5 seconds, and I asked it for a document with a high level, like what are the important changes? Because a lot of this stuff didn't really matter. It's like one attorney rewriting the exact same thing, just in different legal language. It's like, I don't care about that. Tell me like, where are the deal point changes? Where are the important legal issues we need to hone in on? And so it gave me like a very organized 5-page kind of cheat sheet, color-coded. Here's the 5 biggest, negotiating points where there's real changes from the LOI to the contract. And so I got on the phone with my client and went through it with her, and she had actually read the whole contract line by line and had gotten so confused and turned around in it that she missed the actual really big points. And so I was able to lead her to like, hey, these are the things that you cannot give on that are important. She had missed almost all of them by trying to read the contract when Claude could actually point us to those things. And I'd probably spent maybe 3% of the time on it that she had, but I had a better handle on it than she had. So it's just a good example of actually getting a better quality work product out with a fraction of the time And that's just what's incredible, like you're saying. And like you're saying, that's the low-hanging fruit. I mean, that's a pretty small value add. It just saved me time. There's things that are even more important than that.
Well, and we're seeing people use it, just, people that aren't even in the business use it the same way you're describing and just choosing to use it that way. So we met with a landowner the other day, and they want to sell their property. They want to retire. And so they had received an offer off market from a developer. The city had put them in touch with this developer because the city liked the use and liked the plan. So they received this offer, and the first thing they did was they dropped it in Gemini. So they'd have no experience. They've never sold a property before. They moved here from another country. They had bought this one property, and they've lived there and had their business there for, decades. So they've never sold a property. So all they really need to do was drop it in Gemini. And that didn't used to be an option. Prior to this, they would have had to have called a real estate professional first. So they dropped it in Gemini and asked, is this a fair, I think the way they framed it was like, is this a fair offer from a buyer-seller standpoint, or is this like one-sided? That was kind of generally what they were trying to figure out. Ends up, it was a very one-sided buyer contract. And they kind of walked us through the terms that had been offered. And we were like, yeah, those aren't normal terms. Like that buyer was really probably trying to take advantage of the situation of the city had made the introduction and the site wasn't being marketed and thought we can get some pretty favorable terms here. So they ended up, after that, not moving forward with the buyer because the buyer wasn't willing to kind of revise their terms. And so now they're working with us. But that's one of many conversations where landowners are going to one of these different learning models, and they're either like dropping an LOI in or using it to negotiate a contract. That was an example of where actually it worked really well for that owner. I think that they used it in a really effective way. But then we're also seeing times where you have to be really careful how you're using these tools, because someone that isn't in the business, that hasn't sold a property, it's very easy to get feedback from these tools where you're going to miss some of the just context that's needed and not have access to some of the specific data that's needed to make a good decision. Whereas when you put those tools in our hands, due to the amount of deals we've done, our experience, our knowledge of the market, or to another broker who has a lot of experience in the market, that context that they can bring in, even just the way they can prompt it and the way you can read between the lines, I get so much value out of Claude and ChatGPT. But I pretty much never agree with 100% of what I'm getting out of it. You just never do. Like it'll always give me something that I'm like, that's really interesting, or I really like a different way of looking at it because maybe I wouldn't have looked at it that way initially. But I'm never just completely agreeing with it because I'm normally thinking, oh, but it doesn't know about these 4 things. And that's where the person that just doesn't have that context or data has to be really careful, just going straight off of the readouts that you're getting from these different tools.
Yeah, and something I've noticed, I'm sure you've noticed, Tom, is if you don't know to challenge it, so if you don't have that expertise, what I've seen is it typically tries to take an argument and it tries to get to a point of certainty, and so it will take evidence to kind of support the side of the argument that it favors and keep arguing at that point. And if you actually have good evidence and you can challenge it and say, hey, that's not right, this is right, or this is a different way of looking at it, normally it's pretty good about being like, oh, okay, I can see that changes the way I look at this. It can give you a better feedback. But if you don't know that, it will keep doubling down and just arguing this side more and more and more. And it'll actually start pushing you that way. This is why you need to do this. You need to do it this way. You need to do it right now. It's kind of crazy. And so I think there's actually a benefit of using the different LLMs almost against each other, where you can take, if you're sort of being pushed one way to this place of like, this is the way I should go, then you go drop it maybe from Claude, go take that into ChatGPT, and you can get a different response and some different evidence and different reasons, and then you can kind of compare the two. But that's a potential danger if you don't really understand, like going back to our business, if you don't understand the nuances of our business, because there's so many nuances. Like you said, there's simple factors you could take that generally are right, but then every site has all these different little things that can totally change the outcome or the reasons why. And so if you don't know that, you could get into a place of like feeling very confident you've made the right decision and have all this evidence from ChatGPT or Claude for why you made the right decision, and you could be completely wrong.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was playing around with Claude's new model that came out recently, Fable 5, which is considered, at the time of its release, the strongest model that's ever come out. And it's scoring higher than any other model has ever scored against, human engineers or against these different benchmarks. So I was just playing around with it and I asked it to evaluate the data, both our internal data and then public data, and then compare two different submarkets in Dallas. And it was Grand Prairie and Anna, because I know that those are two very different submarkets from a multifamily performance standpoint, both in how projects are renting, what land prices are currently doing, the likelihood of getting capital to go build a multifamily project in those markets. So I had Claude evaluate it. This is a really powerful model. So it has access to incredible deep research. And so it was pulling all kinds of really interesting demographic, job, population. I mean, it had pretty incredible information that it was pulling down around like the number of jobs planned and what was projected over the next several years. And then it was weighting those markets in these different categories. And then it basically came out with like a rating of the two side by side, because I asked it to compare them side by side from 1 to 10. And so in my mind, I would have rated Grand Prairie as a much stronger multifamily market, because that's what we've seen. It's probably held up better than any other suburban market in the Dallas Metroplex as far as, just where rents are. It's had an incredible amount of supply, but the units have been absorbed and the rents have held. Anna has had an incredible amount of supply, but it hasn't had the absorption and the rents haven't held. So Fable 5 ranked Anna at a 9.5 out of 10 and Grand Prairie at a 6 out of 10, because the way it looked at it was like, today, Grand Prairie has all these things working for it, but Anna has all this incredible growth projected. And so it was like, because it puts so much value in what's going to happen, it said, you have the chip plants up in Sherman. And so you have this incredible growth from the north. Sherman's expected to double in population in the next 5 years. So that's happening north of Anna. And then south of Anna, you have an incredible growth. And its argument was, it's the only market in DFW where there's growth happening in both directions. And the only place it can go is basically towards Anna.
Yeah.
And so even though all that's true, if I'm a landowner and I'm getting this kind of information back from Claude, then I'm thinking, oh my goodness, my property's worth so much. You can't get anyone to buy a multifamily site in Anna right now. It's going to be a while. Like it 100% is going to be an incredible market. And we've had a lot of success there already in selling sites and investing in sites there. But we're just kind of in that trough period of there's a lot of supply and it has to absorb. And in Grand Prairie is like the opposite argument. So you have to understand the dynamics of this and then know to then go and prompt it differently and like take it a level deeper. But you have to know how to do that and what you're really getting after. And if you don't, we've had landowners that have approached us and said, my property's worth $20 million because that's what this model told me. Yeah. And then we'll come back and say, well, honestly, here's our analysis. It's maybe worth like half of that. It's worth 10 and this is why. And the reality is like maybe someday it could be worth $20 million, but it could be a really long time. And as you know, it may never actually get to that number. But from the models world, it's just kind of thinking about this linear growth. And if things hold, this could happen. And it's trying to compare it, but it doesn't have all the context that we have within the business.
It's interesting though, because I think when we think about values and markets, we're always thinking about what is it worth today? Like, what would someone pay for it today? And, which I think is a great way to look at value in markets. But I think that the other way to look at value in markets is in a 2-year period or 3-year period, where's the value moving? Where's the market moving for this? Because if I'm a landowner, or really if I own any kind of investment, a stock or whatever, I probably care about what is it worth today, but I also care about what is it worth in the next period of time, whether it's 12 months or 36 months, whatever. It kind of depends on your horizon. But what's interesting is so many people will criticize AI and say it can only look at patterns. And so it can only see the past. It can't predict the future. But what it seems like AI is trying to do, and probably pretty effectively, is start to look at a lot more factors than a human may typically look at and make predictions. And when you were talking about the way it was looking at Anna, to me, it sounded a little bit like the way a land broker looks at these things. Because if you think about the way we've looked at deals historically, we've always been able to see the market ahead of the market. So people will be like, oh, well, this is, to use this example, Anna's not good right now. Don't go invest in Anna. And we'd be like, well, it's not today, but if I'm looking at a 2-year period, it is really good. And so I'm going to go start pushing buyers or, pushing people towards Anna because I know that's the next place it's going to pop. And what it seems like, and maybe you would disagree with this, but what the algorithm is doing is actually noticing something that the market may not be paying attention to. That, maybe today I can't sell a site in Anna and get capital, but probably the next 12 to 18 months I can. And it's probably going to be a deal that actually does really well. I mean, would you agree with that? I know that that's kind of maybe that doesn't apply to the specific situation, but.
Well, I think maybe another way to think about it is it took the emotion out of it.
Yeah.
Because emotionally right now, there's a lot of people that are just getting beat up in Anna. Yeah, it's a very difficult market. And we're seeing that across the state. If you looked at something like multifamily or even single family, I had a client tell me the other day, this wasn't in Anna, it was a different submarket, but he's like, it's a bloodbath. The lease ups against each other, the concessions in the market. But what the AI is doing is it's saying, ignore exactly what's happening right now and that reality and recognize that all these jobs are coming, that like these construction projects are coming. Some of these projects they're like $50 billion projects. So they're massive because it's like the chip plant. And so because they're so massive, you're just not going to see them overnight. And so it's going to be, maybe it might not be like a 12 or 24 month. It might be more like a 5 to 7 year type of time horizon. But it's going to happen, and it's just taking the emotion out of how challenging it is today and recognizing that it is going to be a good market. Now, what the AI really didn't have a way of at least having access to today, from what I could tell, what's the competitive landscape? Because it can tell you that this is a really good market, but it's not factoring in the number of projects that likely might get built.
Yeah.
And because it's kind of two different things. It's like, this is a really good market, so that's going to have a lot of growth, but that doesn't mean that you going and building into that market's actually going to be a good investment because it can't really tell you what your competition's going to look like at any point in time. And that's obviously the difference between a market that we would say is like high barriers to entry and a market that's lower barriers to entry because of zoning or utilities or, whatever that is.
Yeah, because if someone comes to you and says, is Anna a good play for me for multifamily? You can look at the market and you could know, here's all the sites that could potentially be multifamily, which may be a lot. And then here's the sites that we already know, are probably deals, whether someone owns them who's a developer or, they're under contract. And so you can get a feel for it. It's just not public, that Claude's not going to know. So I think that there's still a lot of value in people that have expertise and that understand specifics about, specific areas. I had a conversation yesterday with a client who was talking about an area of Houston and water wells and, mud development. And they're like, I'll just run it through Claude. And I was like, well, if you're talking to an engineer who works in this area, who works with muds and works with water issues, it's okay to run it through Claude. But the chances of Claude knowing the nuances of this part of Houston and these mud situations and how water works and number of connections and costs and how all that interplays, I would talk to the engineer because they're going to probably know it. And I would put more confidence, not to say that Claude's not good. Claude, it would be interesting to know how good Claude is because maybe Claude's better than I think. But I think you have to be very careful. And this is maybe what you're speaking to is that it's generally so good that people can start having this blind faith that like, well, Claude said it or ChatGPT said it. And it could be kind of right, but missing the nuance that actually makes it wrong. And so I think when you're trying to make these kind of specific decisions, like, do I go to Anna or Grand Prairie or what's my timing on this? Or can I get utilities for this site? What's the cost going to be for, getting water to this site and how many connections can I get? I think that the human expertise is still very critical. And I think it could be a long time where it's still very critical. I don't know that these LLMs are going to be able to get to that level of expertise that quickly. Because a lot of it is knowing what's happening with, these conversations of people that are going and tying up sites or, sites that could become one use or another use or in a mud situation, what's a mud board saying behind closed doors about if they're going to expand or not going to expand. I mean, LLM's not going to know that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And if it's missing one valuable piece of information there, that could be the difference. I think that, to your point, it's like it might know a lot, but if there's something that wasn't recorded or isn't known, and our business is still so relational. So maybe if you know somebody on that mud board and knew about that conversation, and suddenly that's how you're going to get your project done, Claude's not going to know that. It won't know that yet. But I think that those are really good points around maybe where we've seen the narrative change a lot. So beginning of the year, because we saw such rapid expansion of the models, and Anthropic in a lot of people's minds kind of came out of nowhere with Claude just gaining so much market share. And then ChatGPT now at 1 billion users across the globe is unbelievable. So there was this narrative that was like, AI is going to replace everybody. It's going to replace all the jobs. And, it's basically going to be like, we won't need to work. And even though there's still people saying that, like Elon's saying that, and there's other tech leaders saying that, they've kind of started to change the narrative a little bit. And I think some of it is because there's such an anti-AI movement now, anti-data centers, anti-AI. And now the narrative is much more around, it's not going to be AI is going to replace people. It's going to be people using AI are going to replace the people that aren't. And so your story was making me think about the engineer that's using Claude is going to be way more effective than the landowner using Claude without the engineer. And so I think that's the difference. It's the land broker using Claude that, has the data. I think what's unique about us is we're using Claude, but we're using Claude with our data. And when you're using Claude with your data, and then you have the benefit that we have of we've collected data now for as long as we have, that's really the unlock, because these models that are so powerful like Mythos and Fable, they're incredible, but they're doing things like math, which is very black and white, very known. Yeah. That's very different than going into like a relational business. I'm not saying that the models can't do incredible work and add incredible value in a relational business, but they aren't going to have all the information that they have when it comes to something like solving a math problem that's never been solved, because they can understand physics. So if they can understand physics, then they can go and pretty much solve any problem, but they can't necessarily go solve, any relational problem without understanding all of the context. And so it's really combining context, data, and the models together. And I'm in the camp of, it's a long time before AI can really just replace people. It's going to be people using AI, and that's going to be the huge unlock. And I think that's going to create a lot of new industry and a lot of new opportunities and just a lot of new creativity that'll come around some of these. I mean, there are math problems being solved right now that have never been solved. And so that's going to unlock a lot of new exciting developments, probably even within the world of like construction, and just ways that things will be able to get built more efficiently, the way we're going to use power, the cost of power, all of that is going to change because of AI, but it's going to be people using AI to help change that.
Well, I think one of the powerful things about it, and I think also maybe the biggest weakness when you look at our business, is the fact that it operates from a place of truth. So it tries to find like what is true, what is black and white, and which is why it's so good at math, because it can take actual facts and then it can build upon those facts to reach a conclusion that's the right conclusion. The problem is a lot of times in our business, it's not that simple. It isn't black and white. So figuring that part of it out, it actually takes a human to have that gut feeling of like, I can take all these facts and I can take all this truth, but then there's all these unknowns. And so then I can make a better decision because I have more information. But the fact that it tries to work to like a level of certainty, sometimes it's not appropriate to have that level of certainty, because you actually can't have that level of certainty. And so I think that's the danger with it if you don't understand that part of it. If you understand that part of it, then it's fine. It's like, okay, it's super certain about this, but I know it doesn't have all the facts. So I'm going to take the value from that, but I'm still going to make my own decision based on what I know. And there's still a level of risk with that. So I think that's interesting. And also the jobs comment, what's also interesting is that everybody who's using AI, people are talking about they're working just as much or more, and they're more productive, but they're not working less. And so the argument, like Elon's talked about, incredible GDP growth. And so do we have this kind of apocalyptic, massive white collar job loss, and crushing, GDP losses, or do we have incredible productivity over the next 18 months, 24 months, and just incredible economic growth. And so that'll be interesting to kind of watch that. But to me, that makes sense because it seems like you're not necessarily seeing a lot of people get fired. You're seeing, more people use it and more productivity within these companies. People actually being more successful at their job and not being less successful.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of the way that work is being done is just fundamentally changing. So I heard a stat the other day that 74% of middle management work is not needed. There's a big research project that was done. And so you think about just the way that we used to work and the need for middle management. And I think that's what's going away. Big companies like Meta and a lot of these tech companies are doing away with middle management. They're creating these flat organizations. You don't have multiple layers of people reporting up, and someone's job is just to go kind of like track what people are doing. Now you have the ability for one person to be able to leverage all this technology in a way that's never been leveraged before. And I think that fundamentally changes things. If people are being way more efficient with their time and then they're also being more productive, then I agree with you. I think you're going to see the expansion of the economy. And with the expansion of the economy, I think that there's going to be enough growth to where there'll be new opportunities. It's really going to be people have to have a mindset shift, and they have to be willing to use the tools. I think there'll be some people that will just choose to age out. Like you said, someone that's been doing it a long time and they're like, I'm not going to let it on my phone. I'm just not going to do it. And for the person that's like kind of close to retirement, it's not a very big deal. I think if you're like 30 years old and you're taking that stance, that's a really dangerous place to be in if you want to have any kind of upward mobility or success in the future economy, or really just the economy we're in today. I think that's a really difficult place to be.
Well, you've probably heard, there's a huge anti-AI movement among young people, which is pretty much like the worst response that you could take. A lot of these college campuses, people are anti-AI. They're worried about taking their jobs and everything. And I was this guy at breakfast who's in his 50s, he has 2 kids in college, and so we were talking about it. And I was like, man, if you're a young person in college, instead of being afraid of it, embrace it, learn the tools, get as sophisticated as you can, and then come into a company and help teach people, help make these breakthroughs, for your company by using these different tools. There's such a need for that, and it can create so much value. But I think you're right. Almost the worst thing you can do is try and be like, well, this is bad. It's going to hurt me. I'm going to act like it doesn't exist or it doesn't matter, and I'm just going to check out of it. That's incredible to me that people would take that stance, but a lot of people are taking that stance. And I think that as we get into the next couple of years, there's going to be maybe even more of that kind of a response politically and just socially of people pushing back and opposing it out of fear.
Well, I think it's from the college student standpoint, it actually kind of makes sense because to me, it stems from a fear and it stems from entitlement. I go to school, I go get my degree, I get a job, and that should all be expected. And now it's like you're requiring something else of me. Like I actually have to go add value because it's really a value proposition. If you can add value, then you can have a job. But I think it's so different than it used to be where not long ago, we just needed X amount of majors, in these different categories coming out of college, and they were going to find a job. And anymore now, so many of those roles, now AI can execute. And so now you have to be the type of person that can leverage, can add value, can multiply. And so I think it's probably a reaction of just a lot of fear around, I'm going to have a lot of student debt, I won't be able to get a job. And the reality is I think there are jobs for those people. I think that there's going to be difficult times where it'll be harder to get hired. But we've even seen in some of the most difficult markets we've been in the last couple of decades, you could still get out of school and get a job. Like, the right people could. But you have to work at it and you have to be able to add value. So I think that is a really interesting development though. And that is a dangerous one.
No, I was just going to say, I think you hit it with entitlement, and I think you with compassion, for people, you work so hard in high school, so hard in college, and it's so hard to get into these good schools now. If you think what these kids are having to go through just to get into like a Texas A&M or a UT, one of these schools, and then to be told like, okay, that's not enough now. Now it's like, maybe your major isn't that valuable anymore. I can understand why that would be really difficult. But to your point, we've hired people in the toughest of economic times when no one was hiring. And we hire the right people that have the right work ethic, that don't have that sense of entitlement, that think, I want to just go add value. If you're that kind of person who's looking to add value, and I tell this to my son Luke all the time, you have to think about, how do I add value? How do I give someone something that's more valuable than their money, so they're willing to give up their money for the value that I can add? If that's your mindset, you're always going to have opportunity and have a job.
Yeah, that's definitely right. And maybe we go there in a little bit. I think it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about like some of the UBI and maybe the way that might materialize with the company or with our country buying or being given shares in some of these big companies, and that could be kind of the way that they think this plays out. Also, some of the ways that that things may change just from the way that real estate is traded over time. But before we go there, I want to talk a little bit about LinkedIn, because I'm on LinkedIn most days, and just really interesting, a lot of what you see on LinkedIn. I guess the easiest way to put it is there's just a lot of BS on LinkedIn around this is how I'm using AI, and I don't need, like, I'm a one-person shop now, and I don't need an analyst, and I don't need an investment committee, and I don't really need anybody because my like team of Claude agents does everything for me.
Yeah.
And I think that I'm sure there's people out there that have figured that out, but I think it's very few of the people that are actually saying that they figured it out on LinkedIn. And having played around with some of these different ideas within these different tools, and just the amount of access we have to data and the way that we've always approached our data as a company, it's so much more complicated than a lot of these just different professionals are making it out to be, which I think is interesting, because I think the result is a pretty negative result if you're getting on there and kind of promoting that like I don't really need anybody and I can evaluate everything on my own, and I'm investing and I'm doing these things, when there's also not really like any track record of actual proven success yet from doing it that way. So just because you can ask Claude to create these agents, because it can do it, creating the agents is very easy. Like actually creating the agents is easy. Them being effective and having access to the right information and making good decisions is completely different. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that, because I think you're going to see people, creating funds and doing a lot of things around just like as much AI as they can, but then they're not going to have some of what we talked about earlier, like the specific knowledge or expertise that is core to like investment decisions, or even like going and buying a development site potentially. And people are going to be using AI to make those decisions. And some of them maybe shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah, there's just a perverse incentive with it when people go on any of these social media platforms, and it's always been that way, is people want exposure, they want to be an influencer, they want to get a lot of likes, get a lot of views. And so the more dramatic you present things and the more sophisticated you sound, you get an audience and people pay attention to you, and they know that this is something that people are talking about and people are aspiring to. Everybody wants to have agents working for them, and this idea of, I'm doing it by myself and I'm making all this money and I don't have to work. I mean, those are appealing messages. And so I think that people want to present something that's probably not very truthful, and it may be partially truthful. And I think there's no question that technology is there and it's going that way. But I think you're right. There's a lot of, if you were to go just take something like that at face value and invest with someone like that, we've seen over and over again how many of the people that take the time to be on LinkedIn and be a big influencer that have this big following are not the successful people in the business. Because we actually know some of these people, and it's like they're not the ones who are doing all the deals. They don't have near the success that they act like they have. And I think it's always been that way with these influencers on social media. So I think people just have to be careful with that. And we actually have gotten a lot of value following some people on LinkedIn and getting there is good advice. And so it's not that it's all BS or, it's all a joke. There's legitimate, good advice and there's good insights, but you have to kind of wade through a lot of people that are just posers, to get to that. And you have to be discerning, I think. And I think it helps when you're both in the real estate business and you're active doing deals, and also you're engaging with AI and you're trying yourself to work on these things. It's a lot easier to kind of see like, okay, this person doesn't know what they're talking about. They're just saying these things and it's not very real, versus that was a great, there's been a lot of these posts we've sent around internally and been like, that was a great post. Like that gave us some unique insight to like, we need to look into that, so it can kind of be both.
Yeah. And it's amazing how fast things are changing. I know we've talked about that before, but if you think about where we are just halfway through the year, and you think about where we started the year and even just some of the advancements this year. I mean, earlier in the year, the concept of agents that we were talking about, earlier in the year, you had to go buy a specific machine. You'd go download these agents and you had to do some kind of like light coding and had to, kind of know.
That was like 2 months ago.
Yeah. I mean, it was not long ago. And now like even, so people were, Apple was out of stock of their Mac Studios and their MacBooks, and people were buying Mac Minis and like building, combining 10 Mac Minis to try to create these agents. And now all of these agents are just now embedded in these different LLMs. And so now Claude has them, like they're all embedded in there. And that's happened in just a few months. And so now you have the ability to direct these agents to go do work. And it's just continued to progress from, directing them to do work. Now they can kind of like direct themselves to do work. They can work now for longer periods of time without needing a human like interaction. It's really incredible just to see how quickly things are advancing. And just if you're in that space of trying to educate around that, it's got to be a really difficult space to be in, just trying to keep up, with like, they'll have these different boot camps on technology and how to take advantage of the latest thing. And by the time you roll that out, there's like something completely new that's already come out. All of that, I think, is just really exciting for us, for the consumer, because we get access to all of these tools. And like we said earlier, just they're so much more user-friendly than they were.
Oh, it's incredible. So what do you think about UBI and some of these bigger societal changes you're talking about?
Well, it seems like, and maybe, the what I was just saying about agents is kind of connected to that too, because I was listening to the Moonshots podcast this morning, and they were talking about just how your business needs to be prepared for agents to come and buy from you, because that's the future. And a lot of it was they had Brian Johnson on, and they were talking about cryptocurrency and Coinbase and all that. And they were talking about how, there's within the agent world, the way that transactions will be funded will be through cryptocurrency. And if you think about how agents are going to be set up to be able to go buy and sell things, as they were talking about that, they probably weren't specifically thinking about real estate or land, but it would make sense that agents in the not too distant future could be coming and buying properties and or managing and selling properties for like portfolios. And so that was a pretty incredible thing just to think about, like a maybe not too distant future that's happening.
It's crazy because I think if you had said that even a year ago, or especially a couple of years ago, people would have thought that was the most crazy, ridiculous, like sci-fi kind of thing to say. And now that it's like, yeah, of course that's going to happen. I mean, that's going to be a lot of these transactions, whether it's stock market or real estate or even as simple as, buying things off Amazon. It's going to be agents, not people. Agents who are integrated with people in their lives, who they're talking about like an ambient AI, that has access to your life and can watch what you're doing, your interactions, personal and professional, and starts to help you, make decisions and help take things off your plate. And so it's going to be doing all those kind of things.
Yeah, that's a little scary to think about, but it makes sense though that would take off, and that you will see that happen. So that was really interesting to think about. And to your point, we're recording this episode the same week that SpaceX had their IPO, and the same week that Elon released his video on what data centers in space, kind of what the first models of those are going to look like. And the same thing, a year ago, people thought he was crazy talking about that. It was like that doesn't, like, how are we going to do that? And so he released this video just to show that what we're talking about is actually not really advanced from where we already are. And so he compared it to his Starlink satellites and basically said, like, there's more complexity in these Starlink satellites than in these actual data center satellites that he would be launching. And you think about if we're able to get these data center satellites in space, just what that's going to do from a power, from a data center standpoint, from a compute standpoint, to kind of fast track everything we're talking about. We're very much living in a kind of a sci-fi future when you start talking about that. I mean, he in that video, it's only 30 minutes, but he talks about how they're already flying constellations of satellites with their Starlink satellites. Now you can be on an airplane and you can be connected on a Teams call or a Zoom call just on the free Wi-Fi because they use Starlink on a lot of these flights now. It's just incredible technology. And so you think about how that technology will change even just the landscape of what we do. I had one of our guys asking me this week, like, so if these data centers start getting, built out in space, then what does that mean for data centers here, like data centers on Earth? I mean, it really probably means you're not going to see as many of them in the future, just because they're going to be there's so much more regulation around it, which is Elon's point. So now you still will see them because he kind of controls space, at least right now. And so unless you want to work through him, you're probably going to still be trying to figure out a way to do them here on Earth. But it could really change just like some of the demand for it here and the timing of it and how backlogged we are. The opportunity for things to really advance and progress if SpaceX is able to get, the rockets in space like they're talking about and put these data centers in space, that's going to be really interesting.
Well, if you look at the NIMBYism we're seeing across the country with data centers, and I think it's just ridiculous, but there's pushback politically, there's pushback in all these, local areas where residents are, really upset about potential data centers and even terrorists can have attacks on data centers. And so it makes sense that you could roll out a lot more data centers in space, actually a lot more quickly than you can here in the US. So that'll be interesting to just see how that all plays out. And there's all this conversation about trying to either stop AI or pause it or slow it down. And I think it just seems like the cat's out of the bag. I mean, it's just too far advanced. You look at what Argentina is doing about just completely opening up, for AI and building data centers in Patagonia and, giving legal entity status to non-humans, to AI. So, I mean, it's too impactful to put a lid on it now. It will be interesting because I think you're going to see a lot of popular support for people who say they're trying to slow it down or halt it. I just think that's not going to be very successful. But I mean, maybe let's talk about these things like UBI or how do you handle people that are disgruntled who don't engage with it but then can't get a job and sort of get isolated from this?
Yeah, well, I'm definitely no expert in this space, but I've been kind of puzzling over this for a while because there's been this conversation about UBI for a while, like universal base income, or Elon Musk, I think, refers to as like universal high income, UHI. So there's different acronyms. And it wasn't really until recently that it actually is starting to kind of make sense as to how you might actually try to pull that off. And so like Bernie Sanders recently proposed the US government taking a 50% stake in these big companies. And so you have SpaceX, obviously, with their IPO. Later this year, very soon, you'll have Anthropic IPO, and then you'll have OpenAI IPO. The beginning of the year, they didn't know if any of this would happen this year. They thought maybe SpaceX would, but SpaceX potentially was still going to IPO next year. It was not expected that Anthropic and OpenAI were going to IPO in 2026. But with them IPOing, there'd be an opportunity for them to maybe pretty much like give, a certain percentage of shares of their companies to the US government. And this is something that like the US government already has ownership in other companies, like 10% in Intel. There's several companies that we have different amounts of shares in, 10% in several different companies. And so that could be the way that this ends up going. And the argument is these are going to be the largest companies in the world. So the SpaceX IPO at 1.77 trillion, and then, obviously we'll see where that goes from a valuation standpoint. And then OpenAI and Anthropic are going to probably be around that number, probably not quite as big, but around that number. Those are enormous companies. And so even just the liquidity to invest in these companies, and that was a big storyline leading up to the SpaceX IPO, was the sell-off in the markets because there was capital that was needing to be freed up to be able to invest in SpaceX. I don't know how there's going to be enough capital to invest in OpenAI and Anthropic, all three of these happening in the same year. I mean, talking about like $5 trillion worth of value. It's incredible. But you take 10% of, ownership in those, that's a large share. And with the type of, just the type of growth that's expected with those, then that could kind of create the needed value and income, kind of the sovereign wealth fund to be able to fund this universal base income. So that's what a lot of people are saying.
Similar to like, when I was in Alaska, we were growing up, they had this Alaskan like petroleum fund, and they would pay every single person who lived in Alaska, including me when I was a kid, got a certain amount of money for living in Alaska just because you're a resident. And so I think that's the idea, but potentially they're talking about, $3,000 a month or something significant that would be paid out as almost like a dividend to people that live in the United States. And so that sounds crazy, and it really sounded crazy maybe a year or two ago. I think it sounds less crazy now, but I think when we fast forward even 12 more months, it's going to sound much less crazy. I could see something like that definitely happening.
I completely agree with you. It really is now materializing a lot more, where I think that there's an expectation that, especially with these IPOs happening later in the year, if it's going to happen, this is when it's going to have to happen. And a lot of people believe like if you're going to try to have some kind of nationalization or government oversight of these, big entities, like you pretty much need to do it, because if you don't do it pretty soon, you already have something like SpaceX, which has gone out into space and kind of controlled all of space, and just the power that it related to that is just kind of unbelievable, and the implications of that, even from like a just military standpoint, what we've seen with some of the different conflicts with Ukraine and Russia and Iran, and just needing to rely on Starlink. And, they're a private, have been a private company. Now they're obviously a public company. A lot of things that would have been hard to believe not long ago, very different place now.
Yeah, I think, I know you think the same way as me, Tom. We get concerned about the government, getting into the AI space, what level of control they might have, or the way they may want to manipulate these LLMs. What is truth kind of questions. I think that there's concerns there. But what's also interesting is just how powerful AI is and how it's changing nation states. Nation states will not have the same influence and power and control that they used to have because of AI. And so that'll be interesting to see just, over the next 5 to 10 years, just how things progress globally. And I think we're really in uncharted waters. And I think for you and me, I don't react in fear to it. I get pretty excited about it. I think it's pretty interesting. And I think the opportunity, especially with the healthcare side and the breakthroughs we can have with curing diseases, is extremely exciting to me. But I know that there's a lot of people that are going to be pretty fearful about, that there will be things that do get shaken up, and that there's going to be a fearful response from a lot of people with that.
Yeah, there's definitely, and there's a lot of conspiracy theories around what's really going on and who controls what and the amount of power and capabilities. That's been one of the big pushbacks, even this week with the Fable 5 model that rolled out, and some of the like parameters that Anthropic put around it, not allowing people to use it for things like, you can't use it for anything related to like biology. So unless you have special access, which a lot of people don't, you can't use it for things like cancer research, and you can't use it for a lot of the medical, because they're then concerned that there's a security risk if you have people, doing things from bad motivation and using it. And so it's figuring out though, like there's a lot of frustration, I think, that they're the ones that get to decide, how it's used. People are upset about that, because they learned off of the general population, they learned off of the internet and everything, and then they're deciding how it's used. So there's going to be a lot of things to work through, but the opportunities are enormous, and they are giving access, kind of a more unfettered access to some of these bigger companies. And then a lot of people believe that really they're just going to be the ones that try to take advantage of the major breakthroughs, and kind of keep that for themselves.
And you're talking about crazy breakthroughs. I mean, we talked about math, the problems being solved with physics. I think when Elon talked about universal high income, everybody kind of rolls their eyes and laughs, and it's like, what does that mean? But what actually is pretty interesting is when you can lower the cost of energy dramatically, which you can do when you put data centers in space and you start to harness the power of the sun, when you're able to tackle these very difficult physics problems. And when energy becomes much cheaper, when you can produce robots that do a lot of work, you can actually lower the cost of everything. And so there's a potential for people to have access to more things they want at a cheaper price. And that's pretty exciting and pretty interesting, especially in places in the world where there is incredible suffering and poverty.
Well, it's interesting for what you're talking about is it's going to be interesting tying it back to real estate. For one thing, that SpaceX and Tesla are here in Texas. And you have, a place like Bastrop that a lot of people didn't even know where that was, is now on the map because of these incredible facilities that have already been developed and are being developed out there. and just the amount of investment that's going into real estate in Texas, the amount of industrial and manufacturing space that's needed because of AI, whether it's because it's data centers or data center related, or if it's going to be directly related to, a lot of the different like robotics that are going to be developed, or whether that's Tesla or these Optimus robots that Elon's making or other companies are developing. I think we're very, very bullish on growth in the real estate markets related to that type of use, like industrial or manufacturing, because the need for compute, the need for power, and then just the amount of hardware, whether that's like robotics or whatever it is only going to grow. It's going to be incredible what's needed. And I think Texas is clearly like very well positioned, data center capital of the world, the DFW area, and then just in general, Texas, because of what Elon's brought, I think it's in a really good spot.
And from a manufacturing standpoint, I mean, if you look at what's happened in the last, couple of years, last decade with onshoring and trying to get more and more production, not in India or China or somewhere else or Taiwan, but trying to move it as much of it as possible to the United States. I mean, from a security standpoint and just all the things we've been through the last 10 years, I think Texas is going to have an incredible manufacturing boom. They're going to build billions of robots. It's not going to be a couple 100,000. I mean, they're going to be building robots like crazy, and not just Optimus, but all kinds of robots for everything that you can imagine. And it's not just happening in the cities. We talk about, the Golden Triangle here in Texas. And so much this is happening inside the Golden Triangle. It's happening in these kind of rural areas. You're talking about just massive infrastructure development, $50, $100 billion kind of investments in that area. And so I think it's really exciting for land, for real estate in general. Just we'll see population growth, we'll see job growth, just a lot of money being spent here.
Well, it's interesting that we're talking about, and you're 100% right, just people are against AI and all the backlash and pushback, whether that's the fact that 70% of consumers are against data centers, which is more than even nuclear power plants, or just in general, high schools, college, campuses against AI. But we are an AI economy now. That's what's kind of crazy. It's like our economy is built on AI. Our economy would not be growing if not for AI. That's been the case for a while now. And the reality is we're seeing it within real estate here in DFW. I mean, most of the industrial activity is some way related to like data centers or data center adjacency. It's the parts, it's the needed components of these data centers. And we're seeing incredible leasing velocity and activity because of that. If not for that, we'd be in a very, very different market right now.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. I think it's super exciting. And I think whatever age you are, you should be excited about it. There's going to be scary things. There's going to be changes and everybody gets worried about that. But I think the opportunities I'm so excited that we get to be alive for this time and get to see this happen.
Yeah, it's definitely, I know a lot of people are saying it's the most exciting time to be alive. And there's what we obviously see is going on. And then there's a lot of backroom, big time conversations happening right now. I can only imagine being president right now and what Trump is getting to discuss or handle on a day-to-day basis, and some of the back and forth that's going on there. It's going to be a really interesting second half of the year. Yeah. I think that's what's amazing is this first half of the year has almost felt like multiple years when you just think about all that's changed. And it's funny because our business, selling land just doesn't trade that quickly. And so the life cycle of land deal is pretty long. We've talked about that a lot on podcasts. But what's happening just in our culture and our economy related to AI and technology, it's going at a speed that we've just never seen before. And so even just trying to say what's going to happen later this year, there's some big predictions. Like there's a lot of confidence right now that you probably will see the US government take some ownership in these big companies like we've talked about. There's a lot of speculation that Tesla and SpaceX are going to merge by the end of the year, which would also just be the largest merger in history after we have the largest IPO in history. The 3 IPOs we'll likely have with these big companies will be unprecedented in history. It's pretty incredible what the back half of this year could have in store. And those are just things that are already being talked about. Who knows what's going to be being talked about in 90 days?
Well, with AI, you're seeing exponential growth. And I think it's hard for humans to understand what that means and how powerful that is. But like you're saying, I mean, it's like many years of improvement happening within a couple months. And it's almost like shocking how much it's like we'll see it at one point, and then a month or two later, it's like totally different. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, Tim, this was a fun conversation. I think it's always enjoyable to get to just kind of talk about what's in the news and what we're seeing and hearing and talking about every day. We'll definitely do more of this because these advancements. The neat thing about it is we're getting to take advantage of the advancements in our own company day to day. We're going to use this a lot to help clients. I think we're being a lot more effective just taking this attitude of we want everyone at DMRE to be adding value, and then we all want to be leveraging AI. We're definitely not in the camp of like, I don't use AI at all. And we're in the camp of like, we're going to use AI to be more effective, to provide a better service, do a better job for our clients. And so we've been spending probably more time than I've ever spent the last several months just trying to learn it, understand it, play around with it. We've invested a lot in it. We have some pretty amazing connections we've made and some third parties we're using to help us, create some new proprietary tools that we're also very excited about. So it's going to be fun to keep going on this journey together and just see where all this heads.
Yeah, definitely. It'll be fun to keep talking about the rest of the year.
Well, thanks for joining the podcast today and listening. We always appreciate your support. Reach out to us. Tim and I love to hear from our audience. If you have questions, especially around this topic or anything you want to talk about related to Texas land, real estate, or even AI, Tim and I always enjoy those conversations. So reach out to us. Follow us on LinkedIn. We have pretty active posting schedule there where we're just posting our content. And so would love to hear from you.
Thank you for listening to our podcast today. If you have questions about land you own in Texas, send us an email at texaslandguys@dmre.com and follow us on LinkedIn to stay updated.